University Press Audiobooks presents Vietnam War, a Chelsea House title, written by Maurice Isserman, General Editor John S. Bowman, narrated by John Pruden. This audiobook is based on the revised edition of the book published by Chelsea House Publishers, an imprint of Infobase Publishing. Preface. Wars generate their own momentum, Robert McNamara wrote in 1995, and follow the law of unanticipated consequences. As Secretary of Defense from 1961 through 1967 under Presidents John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, McNamara had been deeply involved in the decisions that drew the United States into full-scale war in Vietnam, so much so that the conflict was sometimes referred to in those years as McNamara's War. 30 years on, he announced in his memoir, In Retrospect, that he had come to the realization that he and his fellow policymakers in Washington, D.C. had been wrong, terribly wrong, in the assumptions that guided their decision-making in the 1960s. McNamara's belated revelation of his second thoughts about the war provoked furious controversy in the late 1990s. But he was surely right about the law of unanticipated consequences. Among the consequences of the Vietnam War that none of its principal architects had foreseen in the early 1960s was the way in which it was destined to remain, decades after its conclusion, a source of bitter feelings and division among Americans. That bitterness and those divisions were still evident when the first edition of this history of the war was published in 1992. They remain a part of American life today. They were certainly present in the 2008 presidential election, when former prisoner of war John McCain made his experiences in Vietnam the centerpiece of his campaign, while attempting to tie his opponent Barack Obama to violent Vietnam War protester Bill Ayers. As Arnold Isaacs, a former war correspondent, noted in his 1997 book, Vietnam Shadows, The War, Its Ghosts, and Its Legacy, it has been over for a generation, and the Cold War world that shaped U.S. policy has itself passed into history. But the Vietnam War still casts long shadows over American life. It lingers in the national memory, hovering over our politics, our culture, and our long, unfinished debate over who we are and what we believe. It should be remembered that Vietnam, as a Vietnamese diplomat reminded another American reporter in 1999, is a country, not a war. The Socialist Republic of Vietnam, or SRV, is in fact a very large country, one that in 2008 counted 84 million inhabitants, making it the second most populous nation in Southeast Asia after Indonesia. The majority of those 84 million people are young, having been born since 1975, the year that ended what in Vietnam is called the American War. In the years since the first edition of this book was published, Americans have begun to reestablish long-severed contacts with Vietnam. In 1994, under President Bill Clinton, the United States lifted the trade embargo against Vietnam that had been in place since 1975. The following year, the United States extended diplomatic recognition to the SRV. In 1997, Douglas Pete Peterson, a U.S. Air Force pilot who was shot down over North Vietnam in 1966 and held prisoner in the notorious Hanoi Hilton prison camp until 1973, returned to Hanoi as U.S. ambassador to the SRV. Finally, in November 2000, President Clinton visited Vietnam, the first U.S. president to do so since the war. He received an enthusiastic reception from tens of thousands of ordinary Vietnamese citizens in the streets of Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, formerly known as Saigon. Since the 1980s, the Vietnamese government has begun to open up the country to foreign investment and has actively sought foreign trade. The SRV joined the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, in 1996, and the World Trade Organization, or WTO, in 2007. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of American tourists have traveled to Vietnam in recent years. Some of them are Vietnam veterans.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?